All right. So, hi, my name is Amber, and I'm a tutor here at the Cal State Fullerton Writing and Reading Center, and today I'm going to go over how to build a thesis. Just as a quick aside, it's completely normal to not know what a thesis is or what it looks like before we get into this video. It seems that most of us make it out of high school and into our college level courses without ever really understanding the parts of a thesis and how they work together. I know this is what I've experienced, and with a lot of the students that I work with, this is their experience as well. So, don't feel afraid. This is supposed to make you comfortable. Um, so the thesis normally exists in three parts. Um, and when combined, they become like the roadmap for an essay. I like to use the comparison of a thesis to a roadmap because travel routes are like, subject to change. So, in that same way that you might reroute on your way home, your thesis might change depending on where you want to go in your essay. So, but today we're just going to be talking about how those parts work together and how we can begin our writing process without too many headaches just by having a nice, thesis to start with. So the first part of a thesis is the topic. The topic can be anything that fits within the prompt given to you or the focus of your class. That means like, if you have a history class, but you're like specifically talking about the Spanish Civil War right now, well, that's your class focus. So you got to write about that. Um, if you get, that kind of prompt where a professor just says, write anything we discussed in this class, I know that that can be a little scary because, all of a sudden it's just free reign to write whatever you want, but that actually gives you like, freedom to sort of choose what actually interested you about the class. So don't be too afraid when you see very vague prompts. That's usually just allowing you to sort of focus in on something that actually interested you. But based on whatever instructions you're given, the topic is the absolute starting point of your essay. Once you have a topic in mind, the next important part is establishing your claim. Now, your claim essentially says what's important about the topic. Just as a side note, professors may use different vocabulary here. Common vocabulary that is used in place of claim is stance or argument. I prefer to use the term claim, as you will see in future slides, because argument can become a bit confusing when discussing expository essays. Since they're technically non-argumentative, there is, always the argument that every essay that you write is an argument. You're presenting a side to something. Somebody really could always say, nope, that's not it. But for the sake of an expository essay and keeping it simple, we're going to refer to it as non-argumentative in this video. But beyond that, the claim is what is often missing from a thesis. So, if a professor has ever written in feedback from your essay that you seem to be missing a thesis or that it isn't strong enough, you probably need to work on your claim. So, topic and claim are extremely important because they establish what we're writing about and why, but reasoning is how you support your claim. In fact, common vocabulary that may be used by your professor instead of reasoning is support or criteria. If you see these words in a prompt, then that's just your professor reminding you that reasoning is necessary in your thesis. Having clear reasoning becomes the basis for future paragraphs and allows for cohesiveness and coherency. So now that we've seen what the three parts look like, and like what they mean, we can talk about how they work together. Because there are different types of essays that you will be asked to write in your academic career, not every thesis will look the same, nor should they. And there are some general guidelines that will be similar for every essay. So we will only be looking at three examples here, one for an expository essay, one for an argumentative essay, and one for a personal essay. So, our first example is an expository essay. In an expository essay, you are asked to research a topic and then report on that topic in a manner that is generally not argumentative. This type of essay is why I'm more comfortable using the term claim rather than the more polarizing vocabulary argument or stance for the second part of a thesis. By its nature, an expository essay is not supposed to be particularly polarizing, as most argumentative essays would be. Instead, we are simply here to present some research. In this example, I'm using niacinamide as my topic. Notice in the claim there's no polarizing language. We're not saying niacinamide is beneficial or harmful. We are merely stating that it that it exists in skincare, and the reasoning correlates to what studies have shown to be the effective uses of niacinamide. At this point, if you're writing an expository essay and your professor keeps coming back to you saying you're being too argumentative, it is the language in your claim that you want to look out for. Imagine if we added beneficial before ingredient. Then we have niacinamide as a beneficial ingredient, which is a clear polarizing statement and creates a more argumentative tone for an essay that doesn't particularly need it. You'll also notice that I have clearly labeled my separate reasonings here. That's just so that, you can really see where every part of my thesis is coming from instead of me just lumping it all together. And you can see sort of, if you sort of take each one and read it as niacinamide is an ingredient in skincare that may reduce hyperpigmentation and signs of aging, or you move on to the next one. Um, you see how they each work on their own to support the main topic and claim. It's just, just something to take a note of. We're now entering a place where polarizing language is much more necessary. I'm not going to get into defining every type of argumentative essay, but for the sake of understanding how these can look similar, I will be using an example thesis that can at least cover how the first three types of argumentative essay can sometimes be confused for each other, or at least, show almost how one thesis can look like it's for each of these essays. Of course, as I said earlier, you shouldn't be able to just take one thesis out of an essay and then be like, well, now I use this for research, now I'm gonna use it for a persuasive essay. It shouldn't technically work that way, but there are times where like you're gonna realize, oh, this thesis looks almost exactly like another thesis. That's okay. It's just normally it's because you're starting to see the pattern with how the topic, claim, and reasoning all work together. Once you see that pattern, things get a lot easier. Okay. So, um, here's an example of a thesis that I used in my 307 class that could easily be used for the first three types of argumentative essay. As you can see, there's clearly polarizing language in my claim with failed, as well as in an orthodox claim that Victor is characterized as a mother. Um, for a persuasive essay with little to no outside sources, I would have used textual evidence to support not only my claim that Victor is a failed mother, but I'd have to establish how he is a mother rather than a father or just the neutral parent. I would use textual evidence that supports my reasoning that Victor is a coward, as well as evidence that supports my reasoning that he is misunderstanding his role. In a persuasive essay, you're just trying to persuade somebody, quite literally. So that would be without outside source. Sometimes persuasive essays do have outside sources. Personally, I feel like that starts to get into the realm of research essays, but everybody teaches things differently, so just keep that in mind. Um, so for a research essay, I would be bringing those same ideas, but now I'd be using outside sources as well as textual evidence. So in this sense, I would be joining the overall conversation around Frankenstein instead of just working on my own literal interpretations. Um, so now I would be possibly introducing counter arguments. If somebody wanted to say, well, I don't think he's a parent at all, I think he has more of a God complex, this is where I could come in with an outside source where somebody talks about his God complex, they use certain evidence, and then I go, well, based on your evidence, I would say that, my evidence is stronger for the contrary, something like that. And then for the analysis portion, it's going to look a lot like literary analysis because you are analyzing the literature. It just kind of comes with the territory when you're doing literary analysis. Um, but yeah, so you can see how this one thesis sort of almost seems to cover three different types of essay. A lot of times there's a lot of overlap. English is not a subject where things have hard and fast rules most of the time, so just be aware. It gets a little bit weird, but we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. Um, so now for the personal essay. The reason I wanted to do this separately is because obviously now you're talking about yourself, but of course here I'll be using the term I because saying you's a little weird. So even though personal essay can sometimes look like the easiest, it can be difficult to create a clear thesis because we're so often more focused on narrative when writing about our own experiences. If you are asked to write a personal narrative type essay, or this example shows how we can weave personal experience into the same orderly fashion that we've been discussing, where you have your topic, your claim, and your reasonings. Um, for my example, I would be clearly writing about my personal experiences. So this is what a personal statement thesis may look like. And my narrative that would come out of this would be focused on my reasoning. So a narrative of me telling stories to get over my anxiety, a narrative or then expressing how, I did this in safe areas and that helped, and how it allowed me to work through my feelings. All of those would be, examples of a literacy narrative essay or even a personal statement. So, and that's the thesis. So just remember, this is just a general guideline for understanding the parts of a thesis and getting comfortable with them. When you actually are using this, your thesis is never etched in stone. You can always change parts of it. Um, there will be a second part to this video where I talk about that a little bit more, because I will be discussing how your thesis becomes an outline for your essay essentially. So if you're interested in that, then I'll speak to you soon. Bye.